All right. Hi, everybody. Hi. Hope everyone's having a great day. I'm definitely looking forward to tonight. And tonight's special because it's going to be our first seminar of the Daniel O. Trainer Seminar Series. We'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary as a student chapter, and a lot of these talks throughout the rest of the seminar series will talk about, they'll feature some prominent people that have been involved in the Wildlife Society and kind of reminisce on the 50 years that we've been a chapter. So tonight we have Dr. Eric Anderson talking to us, but every other Tuesday during this time that our regular meetings are scheduled, we'll be having the rest of the seminar series featuring Dr. Shelley Dubé, Tammy Ryan, and Kurt Vanderkurten. So, Verkoteren, sorry. It's a hard one. So, without further ado, I will hand it off and we'll get on with the seminar.
So I'd just like to take a moment to go through a couple of acknowledgments. So first of all, I'd like to thank Brylan very much for helping to organize this seminar series. Like, organizing a seminar series is actually no small feat. There's a lot involved in it, and so I'd like to thank her for taking the initiative to want to do this and offering it up for this time slot. So I really appreciate all of you coming. And I'd also like to thank Scott Hinkstrom. He's the director of the Wisconsin Center for Wildlife. You guys probably know, some of you might know him from some of your classes. He's also a wildlife instructor here or professor here on campus. And I'm Jennifer Summers. I'm the Program Development Specialist with the Wisconsin Center for Wildlife, and with Brylan and TWS, we have co-organized this seminar series. So I'd just like to say, again, thank you to everybody that helped organize this. And then finally, anytime we have a live presentation or live gathering, especially if the public can be present, and these are open to the public, we like to go through this acknowledgement. We recognize the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point occupies lands of the Ho-Chunk and Menominee people. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral Ho-Chunk and Menominee land and the sacred land of all indigenous peoples. And now Scott is going to talk a little bit about, like, even though this seminar series is about celebrating the 50th anniversary of TWS, the whole series is our Daniel O. Trainer Seminar Series, and Scott is going to talk a little bit about Daniel O. Trainer.
Thank you, Jennifer, and it really is a pleasure to welcome you all to this first of this year, the Daniel O. Trainer Seminar Series. Dr. Trainer, he was the first dean of the College of Natural Resources. You recognize the name, right? Yes, he's the namesake for the Trainer Natural Resources building. He was internationally recognized as a wildlife disease specialist. He served on the Natural Resources Board here for the state of Wisconsin. He was a longtime ambassador for the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And so it's really a pleasure that we've been able to identify this, the Wisconsin Center has been able to identify this as the Daniel O. Trainer Seminar Series. And we've done a great seminar series last year. This year we have a great looking schedule, and we're planning on this for many years to come. So it's in celebration of Dr. Trainer. With that, it's my honor to be able to welcome our upcoming speaker, and that is Dr. Eric Anderson.
Much more than I deserve.
Eric is an emeritus professor from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. He was a wildlife ecologist here. He retired, we were sad that day happened. He retired in 2016 after 30 years of service here teaching at the university. So Eric really had a passion for teaching. He was well recognized in this area and acknowledged. Now, I don't know how many university and CNR awards he received, but it's a small pile that he has somewhere in a dresser, I'm sure, at his home. Eric, students flocked into his classes because of his energy, his passion, the way he could connect and engage with students. So I think you'll get a little flavor of that this evening. He also was interested and passionate about research, and so he worked especially on carnivore species. So mountain lions, bobcats, wolves, and black-footed ferrets were kind of his forte. And so he's written on those species as well as on habitat selection associated with those species. Active in the Wildlife Society, who was the advisor for this student chapter for 10 years. And I'll say Eric's just an all-around good guy. So we're really pleased to have him here. Eric,
Thank you.
I'll hand you the mic.
All right, we will do this
Thanks for
thing.
joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that kind introduction. I have two mics to turn on, so please forgive me as I fumble with these things to make sure they're on, transmitting, and that life is working. Oh, good. Okay, excellent. That seems to make this mask a little more articulate. I really don't feel bad about missing this whole COVID thing with masks on, because two things that I do. One is that I never wore a microphone in this room. I would just project to the back. And the other is I am a wanderer. And I wander over here and I make eye contact with the guys in the front row, and I'll go back and sometimes I'll lecture from the back of the room here. However, that doesn't work really well with these microphones. So I was told I had to stay tethered to the podium. Let's see how well that works for us. As an academic here at UW-Stevens Point, I was graciously asked by Scott to who's organized this colloquium, to say a few words about what value TWS can bring to students. First off, a few words and academic usually aren't thrown together, because academics usually have far too much stuff to say, and most of the time it's not particularly important to the nature here. So I also think that Scott may be assuming far too much of me when he thinks I have anything of real value to share with you guys. However, I accepted his challenge and hopefully have a few observations that will resonate with everybody out there, or at least at some level resonate with you. I promise to keep this talk mercifully short and as much as possible on topic. Besides, James Barrie, who is the author of Peter Pan, once said that life is a long lesson in humility. And if you haven't discovered that by now, you will soon, because we're always learning new stuff and making mistakes, which is a great way to learn. So we're in an odd and interesting place in history right now. After these last 18 months of seeing our life disrupted, losing loved ones, engaging with each other in a very different way due to the first pandemic in our lifetimes, and without a doubt, not the last one that you guys will be seeing. Just as we thought vaccinations were taking us back out into the light, suddenly a highly contagious variant of COVID-19 emerges, named the Delta variant, that has been spectacularly successful in spreading, despite nearly 56% of the entire population of the United States being vaccinated against it. This afternoon, what I want to do with you guys is to use the example of the Delta variant as a teacher for how to be successful. Not only in getting a job in the wildlife field, but perhaps more importantly, to be successful and satisfied in your life. I know, tall order, okay? I get it. After 30 years of university teaching, helping students getting hired, watching many students successfully navigate the professional world, and some of them not successfully navigate, I think I have a few things to offer to you in terms of insights to stuff. These are things that I wish someone had earnestly sat me down and told me way back when I was searching for my path ahead. Some will hopefully be of value to you, and I know that some probably won't be, so pick and choose. I also want to say this before I start. These ideas that I'm about to give you tonight are advice for everyone, not just those that are seeking a job in wildlife. These are things that can help you enjoy the life that you're living, regardless of what you end up doing for a profession. Currently, there are 430 wildlife majors in the wildlife program at UW-Stevens Point. The truth of the matter is, not all of you are going to get jobs. As a matter of fact, very few of you are going to get jobs in wildlife. That's the truth. That's the reality of what this major is about, and many majors like it in the CNR field. However, each and every one of you will go on to have some kind of a career and hopefully a rich and fulfilling life. So these words are for everybody in this room, whether you end up being a wildlife major or being in the wildlife profession or not. Okay, got a quick favor to ask you guys before we get started this afternoon, and that is, would you do me a favor? Would you lean over to the person next to you, with your masks on, of course, and just ask yourselves in discussion with one another, what attributes could Anderson possibly be talking about that were common between the COVID-19 variant, Delta variant, and getting a job or being satisfied? So what I want you to do is come up with a list of adjectives. I'm going to give you less than a minute to do this, so you got to make your discussions happen very quickly. And if there are some, oh dear, must find a way to fix this. There we go. How's that? Still hearing me okay? Okay, great. If there are introverts that are sitting lonely out there and don't really like to lean over and tell people things, well, you look around the room and you'll identify each other really quickly, and then those two introverts can get themselves together and just discuss this for a minute. Okay, so you got 1 minute. You got the task, right? What you're trying to do is come up with the adjectives that I might be talking about tonight that are common between the Delta variant and being successful in a wildlife job or in life in general. Okay, go to it. 60 seconds. All right, time's up. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to keep track of how many of those adjectives or attributes you came up with actually are talked about in my presentation today. So how many of your list actually got onto here? And then I also want to know how many of my list did you guys identify ahead of time? Okay, so at the very end, I'll ask you how you did in figuring out what this connection is here. So with that, let's go ahead and see what the Delta variant has to teach us here. The reality is that being flexible and adapting is the best thing that the COVID virus has done in the Delta variant. As a matter of fact, that's the reason it came about in the first place. It was flexible and adaptable. And what's true about this is that there was no way to predict what the attributes of the variant were going to be. We don't know what the right path is out there, all right? So, for example, if you want to know how to get a job in wildlife, or you want to know how to be successful in wildlife, if there was one way, there would be one book on the shelf, the library would have nothing but that one book there, everything else would be gone, and everybody could go to that and pull it off and read it, and everyone would be successful. Doesn't happen, okay? You quite know this is not the truth here. There are thousands of ways and thousands of books written on how to get a job and how to be happy in your life. So what I should tell you is this, is that you need to be flexible and you need to be adaptable. You know, recently there's been a surge of interest in the US in chess, and that's probably based to a large extent on the success of the Netflix movie, The Queen's Gambit. How many of you saw that series, The Queen's Gambit? Just so I get an idea of how many people are familiar with it? All right, you know chess, so it doesn't matter whether you remember from that particular movie or not. But consider this for just one moment, okay? There's one way to set up a chessboard, right? After 6 moves into a chess game, there are approximately 9 million different variations that can happen. And then by the time you are 8 moves into a game, there are 288 billion different possibilities. And those possibilities just keep growing. There are more possible ways to play a game of chess than the amount of atoms in the observable universe. Okay, wait. I didn't say the number of visible points of light in the universe. The number of atoms within the visible universe. That's a huge number of possibilities of how a game of chess can be played. That's a lot like your life. There is not just one pathway to follow. There are an infinite number of ways in which you can go, decisions you can make, and directions that you end up traveling in here. So there's really no right pathway for you to follow in your life. I remember sitting down with my dad when I was a senior in high school, and I was trying to articulate what I was hoping for, that someone could just tell me what to do. You know, out of all the infinite possibilities, which was the right path for me to follow? It was then that he told me about another delta. He said, let me tell you, son, about the delta effect. And what he essentially told me was this, is that your life is like a river. The choices are constrained pretty early on by the terrain and the slope and the kind of soil that it's moving through. But the further down a river you go, the more options it has for how it will travel. And the same is true for your life. There are infinite possibilities of what you can do. And just like ribbons of water in a delta, with all of those options, they all end up in the sea. And yet, any one of those ways is the right way because it gets you in the end to where you want to be. So if you think there is just one pathway for you to follow in your life, forget it. You know, nobody's going to be able to tell you what that is because there are an infinite number of ways in which you can approach your life. And it may stagger you, dumbfound you, and sometimes discourage you that there are so many different options for you. But don't worry about it. Get used to chaos. It's all good. That's what we live in, and that's the direction that we had, trying to make some organization out of chaos here. Okay, so what's that mean for you guys in terms of being flexible? Don't get fixated on just one notion of what your future will be. Be flexible. Be adaptable. Sure, you can dream, but have lots of them in every single shade and hue and possible color. As you discover your strengths and passions, play to them, use them. They all end up together, and you're going to discover what it is that you're good at. And as you discover, you should expect that your vision of what you want to do in life should change. Don't get fixated on the dream that you had when you were 7 years old watching Animal Planet. That's what I want to be. There are an infinite number of choices out there waiting for you on the horizon. So don't feel bad if that dream doesn't work out. Look at what your strengths are. Look at what your weaknesses are and figure out, where would I be happiest? Where could I get the biggest bang for my buck in my life? So try to think of it that way. So I started my career teaching science at junior high and high school level in Michigan with absolutely no idea that 10 years after doing that teaching, I would have my PhD and I'd be teaching at UW-Stevens Point and then ended up staying there for 30 years. Like the virus, be flexible, be adaptable. And working a year as a fish technician might be just what you need to work your way into a wildlife job. So don't poo-poo something that's not necessarily directly on target to get you to the place you want to be. So that's most of what I have to say about being flexible and adaptable. The next characteristic that we see happening in the Delta variant is that you need good connections to survive. As with a virus, the only way to survive is getting constantly passed on. Otherwise, you die. That means being constantly in contact with other hosts. That's also good advice for building your own career. Just like the Delta variant, you need to be constantly in contact with other people to get the job or, crucially, the experiences you want. Building networks, as you've heard before from everywhere else, with friends and acquaintances you know and respect is crucial. So, at least it's highly advantageous, if not crucial. So, not only do these contacts help you know about opportunities that might possibly be available, they also may be in positions to put in a good word for you. So even if they're not the ones hiring, a lot of times over the years I have asked colleagues, what do you know about this guy? And I get an informal idea in terms of, oh, he was a great undergraduate student, and here's what I thought about him. Those are really important contacts for you to make out there in the world, all right? So I got a question for you guys. Right now, what 3 non-family members do you know well enough that could give you a reference? Do you have 3 that you could list? I bet some of you have more than 3 that you could list, and I bet some of you would be hard-pressed. You know what? I was such an introvert as an undergraduate. None of my professors knew me. I went to a university that had 54,000 people at it, so it was a little bit bigger than Point, but I still hadn't made those contacts. And as soon as I got to school and started applying for jobs, I couldn't get them because I didn't have people that really knew who I was or what I was capable of doing. So start making those contacts now and start getting connected with people. And you know, I've got to tell you this, TWS is one of the best places to be able to do that. Not only are you making contact with your peers, which turns out to be super important, you're also making contact with professionals, you know, Dr. Hengstrom, for example, or working with somebody in the DNR to set up some kind of a opportunity for habitat improvement project down in the Buena Vista Marsh, or Gene Jacobs, a local raptor ecologist who I think, how many people have been out to Gene's place so far? Oh, good. Okay, excellent. Those are wonderful opportunities and wonderful people to make contacts with. They will pay off for you big time in the future here. All right. So these experiences are really important. I still am in contact here 35 years later with a lot of my graduate student friends, and I've used them over the years, and we've stayed in contact because, well, we're in the same profession at this point, and also the fact that you need to stay connected to find out about opportunities. I'll come back to that in just a minute here. Okay, I have a quick corollary to give to you about this, having good connections to survive. Please, if I can advise you of one thing, don't ever say bad things about people behind their back. Because as much as you think it's not going to travel, it will get right back to the person that you talked about in a negative sense. It's fine to talk behind their back about how good they are. If you got something bad to say about them, just let it die within you, okay? Don't blab it out there. You'll be so glad for that. So try as hard as you can not to get involved in this negative gossip cycle. It'll come back to bite you in the butt. Remember the golden rule? Treat others as you want them to treat you. So you don't want people talking about you behind their backs. So I would not do it to them as well. Okay, here's another piece of advice, and that is never stop learning. Viruses don't learn in the traditional way, but the variants that survive are the ones that have learned how to become more effective, more infectious, more knowledgeable based on their experiences. Hence, as a human virus out there, don't ever stop learning. School is just one, sometimes very bizarre way to learn. Hey, you guys, don't ever let school get in the way of your education. There's a lot to learn out there, and you're not going to learn it from the classroom. You got to remember that when this strange way of learning ends, where somebody stands up in front of you and pontificates to you, when it ends, it's going to end abruptly. And you're going to have to figure out, well, how do I learn now? Well, there are all sorts of ways that you can learn after this bizarre way of imparting knowledge on you is over. And a lot of that has to do with reading and listening and thinking about what it is that you've heard, because that becomes a super crucial factor, being able to think about the information. And I hope every one of you finds that as one of the greatest values that you're picking up here at the university, is that ability to be able to think critically about that information that is coming your ways. You know, your professors do know a lot, but not everything. And they don't always get everything right. Have you realized this at this point? I hope so, because we don't always get it right. And I can say honestly from 30 years of teaching that sometimes I would teach things and then the next day I would read an article that totally refuted what I had to say. And I think, shoot, God blew that. But it's the way it is here. Okay, so that's super important for you guys. I want to tell you quickly about a sabbatical that I took about a decade ago. I was studying mountain lions with a colleague in several areas in New Mexico. And since mountain lions had started returning to Wisconsin in 2008, after having been gone for about 100 years, no one in the state had any experience at all with mountain lions. So I wanted to learn as much as I could from working directly with those animals. How to capture them, how to radio collar them, how to track them. I used my networks of contacts, see, networks, and they helped me locate an ongoing lion project. And then I proceeded to set up a year away from campus here and learn about mountain lions firsthand. So we were foot snaring the lions, we were anesthetizing them, and then outfitting them with GPS collars. So let me pick up the story from there, okay? This is a foot snare for a mountain lion. As you can see, they're forced to walk down this narrow pathway, and although you may not be able to see it here, you'll see that there are a bunch of rocks here. And the animal can't go this way, can't go that way, you can only go through, and these are called stepping sticks. Animal picks up its foot, puts it down here, and is caught, because that's where the snare is. It's a cable that comes, wraps around their arm like this and tightens, and then it backs off a little bit once it's tightened on the animal so he doesn't lose circulation here. Okay, this was set in an Air Force base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, far up in the back country of that area. And I would drive every day and check a whole series of these traps that I had. The morning I came to check this trap, it was as if a bomb had exploded in that location. Okay, see the tree there on the right-hand side, that little lodgepole? That's what it looked like when I arrived. A mountain lion had been caught. We had a trail camera set up just in front of this, and I saw the animal come in on the trail camera. 3 hours later, the animal triggered the trail camera, running very rapidly out the other direction. Now, this cable is a 1/4-inch cable. It's aircraft cable. It doesn't break. However, it did break. We don't know what happened, whether it chewed it and broke it, or whether it worked it back and forth long enough to get free of it. But all I know is this, is that animal, which weighed 165 pounds, which had 20 pounds over my body weight at that point, had gotten loose, and it had the cable around its leg still. So we're in a world of hurt right now. How in the world are we going to save this animal? Because it will cut off the blood circulation eventually, and he'll lose his paw there. So what we ended up having to do was to contact a local wildlife services individual who had dogs that ran lions. And before we could bring them onto the base, we had to get permission from the head of general that ran the Air Force Base, because you have dogs on an Air Force base that has unexploded ordnance out there. All of a sudden, you've got a world of hurt there. So we had to get special dispensation from him in order to be able to go and let these dogs loose. Well, by the time we got the dogs there and released them, it had been about 28 hours since the animal had broken away from the trap and had been wearing that wrist collar. We knew that the blood circulation was impeded into its foot and very likely might not survive. So speed was of the essence here. We were lucky. Less than a mile away from here, the dogs were able to tree that mountain lion. And through a whole series of unexpected events, we were able to dart it out of the tree, get him down out of the tree successfully, and then start processing him and putting a radio collar on him, a GPS collar, so I could just check the computer every day and see where he was located or had been during the nights there. What you need to know about this is his foot was super swollen where the cable had been on there. And I really didn't know if he was going to survive or not. So I tracked him every single day for the next 10 days. He stayed about 100 yards away from where this picture was taken. He kind of, I don't know exactly where he was hanging out, but he was then, after 10 days, made a slight move up the hillside. And at that point, this open pinyon juniper kind of country, I thought, I better get a walk in on this guy and see how he's doing. So I'm alone. I'm in the back country, the mountains of New Mexico. I am miles away, at least an hour and a half drive from the exit of the Air Force Base, certainly a long way away with no cell phone coverage and no satellite phone. I walk up the hillside and I can hear the signal, and I get closer and closer, and then all of a sudden the signal drops, and I'm thinking, oh, for goodness sake, he's running. So I run up the hillside as quickly as I can. I get to the top, I go over the top, and I'm swinging around with the antenna. Not a single signal at all. At that point, I did the learning thing. I looked down at my receiver for the transmitter, and the frequency had shifted. As I walked up the hillside, I bumped it with my arm and turned it to a different frequency that was a mountain lion that was 150 miles away. I wasn't going to pick him up. So I thought, oh, I just need to switch this back. I switched back, and all of a sudden, my ears are ringing because the animal is so close to me. I estimate less than 100 feet away from where I was. Now, wait a minute. This guy has not eaten for 10 days. He hasn't killed anything. He hasn't put anything in his mouth, except for potentially a researcher that's less than 100 feet away from him. And so with the fear of God in me, all I could do was say, okay, I learned my lesson. I'm just going to step back real carefully here. And I walked my way back down the hillside to the truck. And I will tell you, I've never done this before, but I got in and I slammed the doors and I kept the windows rolled down thinking, well, if he really wants to get me, he's going to have to break through that window. But it's all about learning, you guys. It's about having these experiences, and it's about turning those experiences into knowledge. We're going to all have experiences like that where you can learn stuff from it if you pay a lot of attention. So, an important part of, moving forward in your life and being satisfied, always learning and learning in all sorts of different ways. I got to tell you, one of the things that Wildlife Society is very, very good at is giving you all sorts of kinds of experiences. All right? So the Delta variant emerged as after experiencing countless selection factors which selected for it to become more contagious and much more virulent. So similarly, getting a college education is really helpful, but there is nothing that can replace the experience of getting out there and actually doing it. Used to be a TV show called The Magic School Bus, and when my kids were younger, they would watch it incessantly. And there was a woman on it, Miss Frizzle, who had this great saying that I think you guys is absolutely perfect for you. Take chances, make mistakes, get messy. It's not going to be perfect. Anybody out here think they're a perfectionist or have challenges with being a perfectionist? My hand's way up in the air. That's a real challenge for me. Taking this to heart has taken me almost a lifetime. Now I'm to the point where I can get up in front of people and dance like an idiot, and that's okay. I can live with that. I'm just not good at it, but que sera, it's what I am. So this is a great opportunity for you guys to get involved in stuff, get experiences, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, get messy in the process. Learning is a messy process, and nobody expects you to know everything and be perfect at everything, except for perhaps yourself if you're a perfectionist, and I unfortunately understand that far, far too well. Okay, so let's let me leave you, I guess, with one other thought, and that is, you guys, Tree Haven and SWES, those experiences you get there are wonderful. They are hands-on opportunities for you to do stuff. Make mistakes with it, maybe not understand it, and really mess up because you don't understand what it is. So we are one of the very few institutions that have that golden of an opportunity for you. So don't look at it and say, I gotta give up 6 weeks of my summer. It's a wonderful opportunity for you to experience stuff concentrated in areas that you never would otherwise. So take advantage of that stuff. 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails. Quote from Mark Twain, but he really understood well what getting these experiences, even if you're a little hesitant about them, are all about and valuable for. Okay, keeping your perspective. I am not sure this next piece of advice really has a Delta variant connection, but it's one of the most important things to remember. There'll be times when you just can't find a wildlife position, or you feel like you failed in pursuing your dreams. You know what I tell you? Yeah, don't worry about it. Maybe you need to try a different approach, or maybe you need to reconsider your goals. Don't get discouraged by that stuff, and don't also ignore it. Perhaps the universe is trying to tell you something. Use it as a learning opportunity. Try to see what the message is in it for you, okay? All right, and of course, Robert Frost has a really good piece of advice relative to that. In 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. You may think it's over. You may think that this is the deadest of ends, but it's not. It continues, and you gotta adapt to it. Be flexible. Okay, the Delta variant doesn't just sit around waiting for the call to infect someone. If it does that, it dies. It's constantly active, It's constantly spreading, it's infecting others, moving through the hosts. The absolute same needs to apply to you. If you think that the day you graduate, someone will call you out of the blue and offer you an $80,000 a year job, forget it. They won't. It's not going to happen. So, when I graduated from my undergraduate degree, the employment market was dismal. I had absolutely no luck getting a job. So, newly married, my wife and I decided to take an early retirement trip. So we were going to retire for a year and do something cool. We had lots of energy, we had zero money, and we probably didn't have enough common sense to really know what was good in our lives. But what we decided to do there was to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So we spent 6 months getting ready for this trip here, of drying all of our own food, also getting ourselves into shape to make this thing happen. And then on April 1st of the year after I graduated, we started out hiking at the Mexico-California border and spent the next 4.5 months and the next 1,200 miles hiking north. And when we stumbled into Oregon, which was, again, this would have been August at this time, was all the time that we had to give to this particular adventure. But what I really want you to know about this is that you can't just sit on the curb with your car idling in neutral. For God's sake, push it into drive and go somewhere, do something, be something. I don't care what it is you do. Learn to dance, learn how to do any kind of a skill that you've never had before. Challenge yourself to do something, volunteer, get involved somehow or another. There is always something for you to do, but you can't just sit there and wait and fill your time playing video games. There's much, much more out there in life than that. Okay, so this brings us to the very last of the points that I want to make to you, and that is passion and not losing that passion. Last thing I want to talk to you today about the virus falls pretty far afield from any attribute that Delta variant might show. But in fact, I think it may in fact be the most important characteristic in having a full, successful, and rich life. And that attribute is the incredibly powerful engine of passion. Passion is that thing that kept Stephen Hawking, who was diagnosed with ALS at age 21, was given a 2-year life expectancy. It kept him producing ideas and theories until he finally succumbed to the disease at age 76. So this guy was driven incredibly. It's also the same thing that made Michelangelo continue to paint even into his late 80s and to sculpt into his late 80s. And Albert Einstein, you all know he started out as patent clerk, right? But he didn't stay as a patent clerk, but he could have. It was good money. Something in his personality drove him to be passionate about something bigger and deeper and more meaningful than just that. Mahatma Gandhi, amazing man with an incredible amount of passion to lead his people through his own sacrifice of starvation and other individual sacrifices to get them to rise up for their own freedom, which ultimately they did secure. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Aldo Leopold and his incredible passion for living. And here's the interesting thing about Aldo Leopold. Toward the end of his career, he had published hundreds of scientific articles. He had published the textbook for wildlife management called Game Management. Turns out, in the last 10 years of his life, he discovered that talking to other scientists about the natural world was never going to do it. He needed to get to the common people out there. So he spent that last decade of his life writing a book that was not meant for other scientists. It was meant for the general lay public. And of course, that book was the Sand County Almanac. And if you've ever had a chance to read it, you'll see, particularly the first 12 chapters that deal with the different seasons of the year, have so much appeal to the general public, and a good way for him to introduce this idea of the land ethic to everyone who's out there. It's really true. Hegel said this, the German philosopher, that nothing great has ever been accomplished without passion. Now, I don't know if anybody out here recognizes this gentleman. Anybody know who that might be? This guy up here, his name is Everett Roos, and I ran across his story about 30 years ago when I started exploring the canyon country of southern Utah. During the 1930s, early 1930s, at the age of 15, this young poet and artist and adventurer began to take extended solo trips into the rugged canyon wilderness of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. He wrote these feverishly passionate letters to his family back home with the beauty and the vastness of wilderness. Beauty so strongly felt that he feared he would explode from the ecstasy of it. For 4 years, he took trips into the desert Southwest, each time staying a little longer and going a little deeper into the wilderness. It was after one of those long trips that Everett wrote his 2 rules for living. Never count the cost, and never do anything unless you can do it wholeheartedly. At age 19, Everett slipped back into the canyon country for the last time. He was never heard from again. Whether he died or just decided to forsake the civilized life for a lifetime in the wilds, no one really knows. But what we do know about this man is that in his short lifetime, he lived purposefully and passionately. Okay, end with one more story here, and then I'll see how well you did in identifying these attributes. Passion can provide incredible drive to do our best, but it also can remove lots of limits that we impose on ourselves. We realize that even if we don't succeed, at least we can try and do our best. There was a woman in the 1990s, 7 years after graduating from university. She saw herself as a dismal failure. Her marriage had failed. She was jobless with a dependent child. She was living below the poverty level, and she was receiving government aid. It was not surprising she was diagnosed with clinical depression and seriously contemplated suicide. But she loved to write, and even though her life was collapsing around her, she continued to write. In 1995, she managed to finish writing an entire book and promptly had it rejected by not 1 or 2 publishers. She had it rejected by 12 different publishers. But you know what? Her passion kept her pressing onward. And finally, she found one publisher who decided to take it on and publish a limited run of it of 1,000 books to see how it did. The story that she wrote? Well, it was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That woman, J.K. Rowling, is now worth over $1 billion. And she never would have gotten there had she not taken the drive of her passion to keep going until she was finally successful with that stage in life. Okay, I have a final word of advice to give you guys, and I'm going to, in the process, give a nod to Zombieland, the movie that starred Woody Harrelson and Jesse Eisenberg from about a decade ago. I'm just curious, how many people have seen Zombieland? Oh, thank goodness. All right. If you'll recall, throughout the movie, they keep introducing rules for surviving in a zombie-infested world. One of those rules that has made my life so much richer and fuller is this one. Get a kick-ass partner. This is my wife, and for the last 43 years, we have been partners in this life. And I'm not saying you got to get married. What I'm saying is find somebody who loves doing what you do as well. A friend, a colleague, a neighbor even. And of course, it could be a spouse. That would also be a great thing. But the neat thing about this is, this was my PhD work. This is her last year when we were trapping swift foxes in Kansas. So she's still at it, still involved, still a great kick-ass partner, because man, having somebody to share it with makes so much more pleasurable. So with that, thanks for listening to me and inviting me to talk. And can I see a quick show of hands? How many of you hit at least one of the attributes that I talked about today in terms of the Delta variant characteristics versus what you need to be successful in life? Anybody hit any of them? Excellent. Good. Anybody get all 7 of them? I bet you wouldn't, because they went far afield. Excellent. Well, that's really good. Thanks again for letting me come talk, and I'm glad to answer any questions if you might have them, but the nature of this talk might not be one that generated a whole lot of questions for you, but I'll certainly stick around afterwards here. Berlin, where are you? There you are. Do you want to orchestrate any questions and answers if there are? Anybody have any questions?
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
Did the mountain lion keep its paw, do you know?
Oh. Yes, and it's a sad story though. The reason I know it kept its paws and didn't lose any of its toes is that it was chasing after a deer. It crossed over I-25 and got smacked by a truck. So we got a call on that one and were able to retrieve it and see that the toes were still fully functional. So it did survive. Okay, great question. Great question. All right, if not, I will stay up here and be glad to talk to anybody if you have any questions.